try to answer as much questions as possible during this meeting. And today's presentation and all questions and answers will be posted online alongside the solicitation within the next few days. So Steve, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Guillaume. Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Platts. I'm the Chief Scientist of the Human Research Program. And today we're going to talk about the 2024 Human Exploration Research Opportunity Appendix D. This is a very focused solicitation. There is no omnibus component to this. So all proposals written should directly address this appendix. What I'm going to do today is just give a little background on HRP for those of you who may not be familiar with us. And then I will talk a little bit about the solicitation, and I will ask HHC, Dr. Bricado, to talk a little bit more specifically about the topic. We will have perhaps a bit more extensive discussion of the dual anonymous peer review this time than we have in the past, because our last solicitation, there were some issues and a lot of folks didn't read the directions, and so we had a number of proposals that were declined because they violated the dual anonymous peer review process. So we will go through that a little bit more just to make sure everybody is fully aware. And then we'll open it up for questions. Next slide, please. The intention here is to clarify the solicitation and do some of the things that I've already mentioned. This conference is open to all. Anyone can attend. As Guillaume said, this presentation, as well as any answers to questions, will be posted on the NSPIRE's website so that, again, they're open to all. If you ask a question that we may not be prepared for, you may hear us go quiet for a little bit while we discuss in the background so that we can answer your question properly. Occasionally, there may be a question that we can't answer right away, and we will answer this and post it to the website at a later time. Next slide, please. Great, so a little bit of background on the Human Research Program. We are an applied research program. We are not like NIH. One of the things I tell everybody is we are not NIH in space. We don't have the resources to do some of the more mechanistic, basic, or fundamental work that we might desire. There is another program within NASA called Space Biology, and they do a lot of that work. So if that's the type of work you're interested in, I encourage you to look for their solicitations. Our work is very risk-based, and we are very focused on the risks to the human for exploration spaceflight. So we have three main purposes. One is to perform the research necessary to both understand and reduce the risks for human spaceflight. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. We also enable the development of human spaceflight medical and human performance standards. These are things like radiation exposure limits, nutritional requirements, exercise prescriptions, those types of things. And then finally, we develop and validate technologies that can be used to both characterize and reduce this risk. Best example of this is the ultrasound that's aboard the space station now. The first one that we flew was an entire rack. It was huge, about the size of a washing machine. For those who don't know what a rack looks like. Big, heavy, cost a lot. The current device is a laptop size, and all future devices will essentially be a cell phone with a probe attached. So developing those technologies, getting them ready for flight, getting them certified, and making sure they meet all the requirements for research are things that we do. Next slide. We do our research in steps. Because spaceflight research is so limited and so expensive, we do as much as we can here on Earth. And so we have a number of ground analogs that we use to do this. We have BEDREST analogs. One of the BEDREST analogs we use quite frequently is called NVHAB, and that's in Cologne, Germany. We also have isolation experiments. Antarctic stations are good places for these, especially the Palmer Station, which we've been utilizing quite a bit lately. We have in the past used the long duration isolation facility in Moscow at the NEK, and we have our own shorter duration isolation facility called HERA. And then we also have the Space Radiation Laboratory at Brookhaven National Labs on Long Island. We also do low Earth orbit research. This is the International Space Station. It's the only place right now where we can study microgravity and its effects. And you can imagine that microgravity is a large contributor to what we anticipate happening to the crew on lunar and Mars missions. And so it's really important that we use low Earth orbit as an analog for future exploration spaceflight, and we're doing that as well. Finally, we will be going to the moon. We're preparing, we've already flown one Artemis mission. We're preparing for future Artemis missions, and we're designing research in an incremental fashion to address some of our risks, both for lunar operations as well as moving future towards Mars, again, using the moon as an analog for another partial gravity environment, which is Mars. Next slide. So generally, a few things about HRP. We are composed of what we call elements. There are 5 of them. You can think of them essentially as departments, like they were at a medical school or something. So there's EXMC, Exploration Medical Capabilities. They're essentially the future of medical operations, very forward-looking. They do a lot of the hardware development and computer modeling. Human factors and behavioral performance is exactly what it sounds like. They study both the interface between the human and the vehicle or the habitat, as well as any individual and interpersonal interactions that may occur, team dynamics, things like that. Since the call today is for human health countermeasures, I'm going to ask Dr. Bricado to tell you a little bit more about her element. Becky?
Hi, thanks, Steve. So my name is Becky Bricado. I'm the deputy scientist in HHC. Our element is led by our element scientist, Dr. Mike Stenger, who unfortunately is not here today, but we are joined by our associate element scientist, Dr. Stuart Lee. In Human Health Countermeasures, or HHC, we aim to understand the physiological effects to humans during spaceflight, and in determining those physiological changes, if they are deemed detrimental to astronaut health, either during their mission or into their long-term health, we develop countermeasures for these risks. In HHC, we have 3 very diverse portfolios. Our first contains all our research towards the cardiovascular and SANS risk. Our multi-systems portfolio contains research targeting microhost interactions, immune, food, and nutrition. And our third portfolio is exercise and performance, containing research towards sensory motor, bone, surface EVA, and exercise, which is why you all are here today. Back over to you, Steve.
Thank you. Space radiation studies the biological effects of radiation exposure on the human. And when I mention this, everyone instantly thinks of cancer, and that is one of their risks, but also the biological effects of radiation on the central nervous system as well as the cardiovascular system. And then finally, research operations and integration. They don't solicit their own research per se, but they're the ones who do all the integration and certification and coordination of schedules with the station program as well as all of our analogs. So they really make our research happen. We also fund the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, called TRISH, and that's a cooperative agreement, and we ask them to be disruptive, like a skunk works for us. They go out there and look for very innovative, outside the box ways of doing things and addressing our risks. They do the things that are sometimes hard for a government entity to do. And then finally, we collaborate with lots of other government agencies like DOD, NIH, CDC, FDA, as well as other NASA programs. And I already mentioned space biology, and we do a lot of work with them as well. Next slide. Here are some of those venues I mentioned for our analog space station, obviously top left. Top center is the NVHAB facility, the BEDREST facility that we often use in Cologne, Germany. The radiation laboratory at Brookhaven is top right. We also sponsor parabolic flights. These can be good for, especially for hardware checkouts and technical demos, things like that, or getting preliminary data for the effects of short duration microgravity on different aspects of human physiology. Bottom center is the HERA, the short duration isolation facility, and then a picture of one of the stations in Antarctica. As I said, we use multiple stations, but Palmer has been the one that has given us the most reliable analog results. So we tend to focus on that one. Next slide. So when I talk about risks, this is really what I'm talking about. I know it's a little difficult to get a grip on right away, but if you look at the far left column, what that is all of the risks to the human that have been identified by the Human System Risk Board, and they are divided up by hazard. There are 5 identified hazards to the human for spaceflight. And as we move to the other columns, what these are is different missions, and they're generic missions. They're not designed initially to represent like Station or Artemis or whatever, but they're generic missions that are similar to missions that we are likely to have. If we start on the far left, that's low Earth orbit. And then we move to lunar orbit, and as we move to the right, we get longer duration missions and further away from Earth. And the far right column is Mars planetary missions. And so what the colors are is our assessment of the level of risk to the human that particular risk poses. So the green risks are the lowest level risk. Yellow is moderate, and red is the highest level of risk. And you can see as we move to the right, we get more red. As we look at the far left, we don't have any red. If we go look at the far right, we have a fair amount of red. So this is one of the ways that we use to prioritize what research we're going to spend our taxpayer dollars on. Next slide. As you can imagine, we have a number of constraints that are placed on us. Being NASA and being an applied research program, we have lots of constraints on schedule. We don't decide when the flights happen. We have to fit all of our work into the existing flight schedule. Crew access is often an issue. We only have access to the USOS crew members, so that's half the crew. And then remember that all human research is voluntary, so we pitch the experiments to the crew and they decide which experiments they'll participate in. So it's often difficult for us to get the full N that we're looking for our studies. And even when we do, that N is quite low. Very limited resources here. And so because of this, an investigation should significantly contribute to our risk reduction focus. While we do like innovative research, as everyone does, the risk posture of the study is more important to us, to the level of innovation of the work being done. I know this goes against all of the NIH instincts that we have, but we are seriously trying to address these risks, these medical risks to the human. And if something is highly risk relevant, can change us from our red to yellow, that's way more important than someone using a new technique or omics or tissue chips or whatever. It's the work that's important. And so these results must address the risks and the gaps that we have. Next slide. And so one of the things you should be focusing on as you write your proposals is, does this study address the risks and associated gaps outlined in the solicitation? If you don't, your proposal will not score well, and it may not even be scored at all. And so this right here is describing what the primary and secondary risks are. So the primary risk is the risk of mission performance decrements and adverse health outcomes resulting from reduced cardiorespiratory and musculoskeletal fitness, and the gaps are listed on the right. And then a secondary risk is the risk of bone fracture due to spaceflight-induced changes to bone. Next slide. As I mentioned, it's hard for us to get a large N, and A robust statistical design is really important, and for this reason, all of our review panels have at least one statistician on the panel, and proposals must include information on how they powered the study, what the sample size is, how they're going to control extraneous variables, things like that. Don't skip over this. Don't think it's just a box to check. This is really important, and if you don't have it, your proposal will suffer. And here it says step 2 proposals, but this is a one-step process for this particular one. So all of your proposals must include a dedicated section describing your statistical approach. If you don't have one and don't have a really good justification, your proposal will not be reviewed. Next slide. As I mentioned, this is a one-step submission. This is different than the way we usually do business, but we're trying to expedite the process here. And so the full proposals with a 10-page limit are due by January 30th, 2024, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For process, they will still go through the dual anonymous peer review merit review by a panel of scientific and technical subject matter experts. And then we will also do a secondary programmatic review for feasibility and cost. The final award decisions are expected to be announced no earlier than July 2024. Next slide. So just to say a few words about the dual anonymous peer review. So the purpose of dual anonymous peer review is that both sides are blinded. The reviewers don't know who the proposers are, and the proposers do not know who the reviewers are. Why is this important? It has been shown time and time again that during the review process, there is inherent bias. As much as we try and eliminate it, it's unconscious. And so by blinding the reviewers to the study team, preliminary reviews by NASA programs have shown an increase in diversity and inclusion of our proposal selections based on that. And that's something that is very desirable for NASA. In fact, our first process showed many more early and new investigators were selected when they were blinded. And so what does this mean? It means that you should not talk about your research when you write your proposals in a way that would make it easy for reviewers to know who you are. So, you know, some of the things to avoid is there, and this is all spelled out in the solicitation. Don't include references by author name. Use only a number in a square bracket. Don't claim ownership of work performed. So don't say my previous work or our other preliminary work, other things like that. Don't say our, don't say my, because, and you might say, well, people aren't going to know. Yes, they are. And one of the requirements for HRP work is that you come and present at the investigators workshop. So if you're an investigator who's been funded by NASA before and you've presented your preliminary work at IWS, I can guarantee you that people who will be on the panel have seen your work. So if you say our preliminary data show, they will know who you are. And if you put that in your proposal, you will not get reviewed. Do not include any information that might reveal not only you, but also your institution. This is saying things like the core facility at University XYZ will perform analysis. Nope, don't say that. Don't say who's going to select your test subjects. Don't do anything that would identify yourselves or your institution. Also, do not identify yourself as a new investigator or an early career investigator. In the body of the proposal, there's a checkbox that you can use as you're filling out the paperwork, and that will identify you in the way that's appropriate. You should not mention it in the body of your proposal. Next slide. Okay, but just before we get to this for a second, to continue a little bit more with the dual anonymous peer review. You know, we've gotten a fair number of people who were declined because of violating DAPR, and they don't understand, and it's when you read over them, it's quite obvious what they did that violates the spirit and the rules of the dual anonymous peer review process. So I can encourage you enough to make sure that you read through the solicitation. We tell you exactly what to do and what not to do. Don't just say, well, I've written a bunch of NASA proposals before, I'll do it the same way I always do. It's a recipe for disaster. And when we review these, we are very black and white. We don't give the benefit of the doubt. We don't assume it was an accident. If you violate the DAPR process, your proposal will not be reviewed. We're very strict about it. I can't stress that strongly enough. Next slide. So here is a description of the solicitation for the exercise countermeasure study. Becky, would you mind going through this and talking more about what HHC is looking for this solicitation?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So as Dr. Platts had mentioned, Appendix D is a single, very focused topic. It represents our first step in a multi-campaign effort using BEDREST as an analog for spaceflight. Our element has recently updated our research strategy for the risk of mission performance decrements and adverse health outcomes resulting from reduced cardiorespiratory and musculoskeletal fitness. This strategy can be found publicly on the Human Research Roadmap on nasa.gov. I encourage you to read that as you're putting together your proposals. The objective for this solicitation that we are prioritizing is to assess the relationship between measures of physical fitness and relevant biomarkers and metrics of performance of mission-relevant tasks. For this study, NASA will implement a strict 60-day head-down tilt BEDREST study to include 2 groups of 12 subjects each, with an equal split of males and females. One group of 12 will be the head down tilt control group, and the second group of 12 will conduct a provided exercise prescription for aerobic and resistive exercise using the Orion flywheel device. So NASA will be providing the hardware exercise device to be used, and NASA is providing the exercise prescription that includes the frequency, intensity, and duration of exercise. What we are interested in receiving from you guys is proposals that, first and foremost, is the leadership and management of the BEDREST study. The awardee, we expect, will work very closely with the BEDREST facility in the development of a study plan. And this will be an overarching plan that will be used for the study described in this appendix, but can also be applied to future BEDREST campaigns. We have a current parallel effort underway to identify a BEDREST facility. So as part of this effort, the HRP BEDREST standard measures, of which there's a link that was included in the solicitation, will be folded into the facility proposals and does not need to be included in your proposal. So in addition to the leadership and management of the BEDREST study, your proposal will be critiqued on measures and biomarkers of physical fitness and functional performance test protocols. The intent of these is to characterize the effect of deconditioning or its prevention of deconditioning on operationally relevant tasks. So finally, I just want to re-emphasize that this solicitation does not seek the development of a new exercise prescription, hardware, or adjunct therapies at this time. You should focus your proposals on, number 1, the leadership of the BEDREST study, number 2, existing and novel measures and biomarkers of physical fitness, and number 3, functional performance tests and how those measures or biomarkers could be predictive of functional outcomes. And lastly, as I mentioned before, we do not know which BEDREST facility this study will be conducted at as of yet. We intend for this facility to be located domestically, so any travel to the facility should be estimated as domestic travel. And we intend to publicly announce this BEDREST facility either prior to or concurrent with this Appendix D solicitation award. Back over to you, Steve.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So the few key dates for this solicitation, the proposals are due January 30th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And as I said, the proposal selection announcement is expected to occur no earlier than July 2024. Next slide. And then Guillaume, are you going to talk about this part? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So this is a follow-up on Steve's presentation, which will be mainly focused on the dual anonymous peer review process, DAPR. As Steve mentioned, HRP and NASA are deeply committed to DAPR to ensure a fair and unbiased review process. So here I will give you an overview of the process and also give you some guidelines. You also have a very detailed guidelines document posted alongside the solicitation. So I strongly encourage you to take a very close look at this document when you're writing your proposal. So why using DAPR? So a key goal of peer review is to level the playing field for everyone. We know it's difficult to completely interrupt biases through training alone. It would require structural changes. And DAPR aims to create a change in the tenor of discussions away from the individuals on the proposing team and towards the proposed science. DAPR is not completely a blind process. Proposers submit first an anonymized proposal, and alongside these anonymized proposals, also submit a not anonymized expertise and resource document. The merit of the proposal will be assessed anonymously and will be determined separately from the not anonymized qualifications of the team. Nevertheless, the qualification, track record, and access to unique facilities will form part of the evaluation. So for your submission, again, as Steve mentioned, a lot of examples, all the details, again, are available to you on the guidelines document. But for example, make sure you exclude names and affiliation of the proposing team, including in figures and references to personal websites. Do not claim ownership of past work. So for example, my previously funded work or analysis shown in Bacon et al. 2012. No, don't do that. Cite references in the passive third person. So for example, prior analysis indicates that. And do describe the work proposed. So for example, it says, we propose to do the following, or we will measure the effect of. But make sure that at any point in your proposal, in the anonymized part of your proposal, you do not claim ownership or identify or implicit any team member or institutions. And also make sure you include a separate non-anonymized expertise and resource document. So in the very exceptional case where you would like to reference unpublished work or proprietary results, we are aware that it may be sometimes important to cite exclusive access datasets, non-public software or unpublished data, or findings that has yet to be presented in public before but are not stable. Each of these may reveal or strongly implies the investigator on the proposal. So in these instances, proposers must use language such as obtained in private communication or from private communication when referring to such potentially identifying work. But again, we expect such cases to be extremely rare. And if you have to go that way, again, make sure you really have to go that way first, and then follow the guidelines here and in the guidelines document, and make sure you do not reveal or strongly imply any team member more than you should for this specific case. So the review panel will be conducted in 2 steps. First, the science review. Each proposal PDF will be assessed based upon significance, mitigation risk to crew health, approach, and statistical plan. And then expertise and research review. So after the science review, using the separate non-anonymized PDF, the panel will assess the proposal as and the proposal team as uniquely qualified, or unqualified. The expertise and resource review phase may not be used by the panel to reevaluate proposals or to change the assigned adjective grade. And we expect most of the proposal to fall under the qualified category. So we're observing and analyzing the other programs as they adopt and adapt to the DAPR approach to peer review. Formal support in Inspire is implemented but still new. DAPR represents a major shift in the evaluation of proposal, and as such, there may be occasional slips in writing anonymous proposal. So as Steve mentions, please make sure you strictly follow all the rules and DAPR guidelines and requirements. Otherwise, you will take a very serious risk to compromise your proposal, and maybe this one will be not reviewed at all. So can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to follow the DAPR requirements when you're writing your proposal. And NASA further acknowledges that some proposal work may be so specialized that despite attempts to anonymize the proposal, the identities of the principal investigator and team members are readily discernible. As long as the guidelines are followed, NASA will not return this proposal without review. But again, you have to make sure that all guidelines are followed. But overall, so DAPR has promised in increasing the focus on the scientific reviews and reducing bias, as Steve already previously mentioned. So now it will be time for questions. So feel free to ask any question in the chat, and we'll try to address as much as possible by the end of this meeting. And any not answered questions will be addressed after the meeting, and the full Q&A document will be made public alongside the solicitation within the next few days.
All right, thanks, Guillaume. So we've opened up for questions or discussion, so please just put that in the chat, and we'll address those until we run out of time or until there are no more questions. Question from Kate: when you say mission-specific task performance, can you elaborate on that? Are they specific measures, etc.? Becky?
So we are looking for novel ideas, and there are several references that are included in the solicitation that you could refer to, but really we're looking for new ideas. So we don't want to put you in the box, so to speak, of doing X, Y, and Z. We want to hear what ideas you have as well.
Great, thanks. From Peter, just to confirm, there will only be one proposal selected. Does this mean the proposal should include the full scope of science to be studied for the entire project? Becky?
When we say the entire project, it's what is contained in this solicitation. We are planning for this to be, a multi-campaign effort, but this selection will not select for the future as well. It will be specifically Appendix D.
From Lance, should proposals indicate their ability to execute a BEDREST study at their own facility? No, even though we haven't identified which facility we will have the BEDREST done. NASA will be identifying the BEDREST facility. It is not up to the investigator to identify that facility or to scope the work that the facility would have to do to support the studies. All you need to scope is the science that's being requested in the solicitation, and NASA will determine which BEDREST facility will conduct the study. Do we have any further details on the flywheel exercise prescription that will be implemented in BEDREST? Becky?
Yeah, at this point, no, we are not going to release any details on that. Just know that we will be providing you the prescription that will be used.
Thank you. Can you exemplify how leadership and management can be evaluated? Not quite sure I know what that question is trying to get at. Dimitri, can you rephrase your question?
Hi, sorry, should I do it like verbally? Can I do it verbally, or I should write it down?
No, we need it to be written so that it can be documented.
Okay.
From Carl, will this BEDREST study be integrated with other studies similar to past BEDREST studies done, for example, multiple PIs using the same group of people? Becky?
So is the question asking whether we will be soliciting for non-exercise components that were of measures that you could just do in BEDREST? Maybe I'm not following the question quite right.
I think that's potential. I think what Carl is asking is, are we going to do other science at the same time as this? That may potentially, confound it. So you can assume that the BEDREST standard measures will be done for sure. Those are always done in every BEDREST study. So I guess from that standpoint, there will be some other things done. Standard measures will definitely be done. But Becky, are you assuming that this is going to be a standalone study, or that other studies might get integrated into this BEDREST study?
Yeah, so I would say that if the other PIs have science that is critical to what you as the PI, Carl, are going to propose, then you should include those on your study teams. But there's always a possibility that we will be adding other components that will need to be integrated as well.
And that integration is done by our folks here at Johnson Space Center. So ROI would do that integration. You wouldn't need to do that yourselves. All right, so Dimitri's rephrased his question. The opportunity states 3 major components will be assessed, including leadership. Is my understanding correct? If so, how PI's capacity for leadership will be assessed? Becky?
I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Lee for this one.
Okay, Stuart.
I'll admit this is a tough quality to perhaps describe in this dual blinded peer review process, but you should focus on writing your proposal as if you are the principal investigator and demonstrating your organizational skills with the research and the implementation of the components of your proposal, so that it's clear that you have a full grasp on the project and the science that you intend to propose.
Thanks, Stuart. One thing to follow up with that too is when we're doing the dual anonymous peer review, the science merit is determined blinded. Once the science score has been finalized, then the reviewers are unblinded as to the investigator in their institution, and they analyze the capability of the team to do the work that they propose. And so there is a component of leadership that goes into that as well, in addition to what Stuart was saying about, you know, how you can run a BEDREST study and what experience you might have with BEDREST and things like that.
Yeah, the review process is also described in the solicitation, and as Steve mentioned, the first step is a science review, which will be based on the anonymized proposals PDF that will be uploaded in Inspires. But you will also in Inspires submit a non-anonymized PDF called resources. And so in this document, you will describe your team members. You will provide the resume. You will provide a description of your facilities you plan to use for this study. And all of that will also be assessed by the panel, but after the science review. So we still have a few minutes to go. If you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat. So I don't see any additional questions coming up. So Steve, do you have anything you would like to remind proposers before we adjourn? Oh, we have actually one question.
All right. Yeah, there are a couple more that popped up. So will there be other solicitations where PIs can contribute proposals for BEDREST, biomarker science, but not necessarily lead and manage the full BEDREST study? No, there isn't. What we're soliciting for in Appendix D is all that is forthcoming, and you should make sure that any proposals that you write specifically address what's asked for in this specific solicitation. From Carl, while I know you're still determining where the study will be conducted, do you anticipate having MRI or CT capabilities? Becky, do you know?
So we are expecting that the facility will be like a clinical research facility and have those capabilities. MRI, I believe, is included in the HRP standard measures. I do not think CT is. So if your proposal requires CT capabilities, that may be something that you would have to budget for in the PI science, not as part of the facility costs.
Great, thanks. From Lance, so PIs are proposing to lead execute a BEDREST study at a facility TBD. Are PIs also responsible for collecting standard measures? No, you are not. And then if so, what is the frequency? You don't need to worry about that. Anything, just worry about what's written down in Appendix D, focus on that. Any additional work, NASA will take care of implementation. It'll all be integrated after we have a selection. Must all of the equipment be purchased? Well, you have to have the equipment you need to use to propose, to do the work that you're proposing. From an experimental standpoint, you don't have to buy beds and things like that. Remember, I said NASA will take care of the facility. So you can expect that the facility will be staffed with nurses and have beds and have a metabolic kitchen and have all the things you need to do the study, and that the costs of the facility itself are part of what NASA covers, and you need to propose the work that we're asking for here for the exercise countermeasure. Can you propose to data share with the current listed standard measures in addition to the novel science proposed? Absolutely. That is the intention of standard measures, and it's a good use of the taxpayer dollar. It saves time, it saves money, so you can absolutely propose to data share with the standard measures.
Steve, I'd like to have a go back on one of the previous questions for a moment.
Sure.
Someone asked previously, and my interpretation of their question was, could you, what happens if you have a specific biomarker, but you don't really want to be the lead of the team? I think from a person perspective, I would highly recommend that you seek out other teams who might be more suited to leading or have previous experience and work with them. I think that's a good use of your expertise and their expertise to lead, and your expertise on a particular biomarker that may result in a positive review.
Thanks, Stuart. Good comments.
And Steve, I also just want to make this other comment that the about the data sharing with the standard measures. You probably will want to call out that you plan to data share those things, but certainly don't include the standard measures in your budget. We don't want to duplicate measures to get the same information.
Correct. Any more questions? All right, seeing none and hearing none. Thank you all very much. I wish you the best of luck writing your proposals. I hope this was helpful. It will be posted on the NSPIRE's website, so you can go back and refer to it. And all of the questions that were asked will also be available along with their answers. Guillaume, do you have any parting words?
Nope, I think you covered everything already. So thank you again, everyone, and wish you best of luck in your submission. We'll go
Okay.
ahead and adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.